It is the year 0079 of the Universal Century. Half a century has passed since Earth began moving its burgeoning population into gigantic orbiting space colonies. A new home for mankind, where people are born and raised and die. 9 months ago, the cluster of colonies furthest from the Earth, called Side 3, proclaimed itself the Principality of Zeon and launched a war of independence against the Earth Federation. Initial fighting lasted over 1 month and saw both sides lose half their respective populations. People were horrified by the indescribable atrocities that had been committed in the name of independence. 8 months had passed since the rebellion began. They were at a stalemate. There is no doubt in my mind that the single most important story within the entire franchise of Mobile Suit Gundam is the 1 Year War. It set the standard for what Gundam is, and there's a plethora of stories in anime, manga, and video games that go over exactly what happened to the main cast of the original show, plus soldiers fighting on both sides of the conflict. So, over the next few weeks, we'll be discussing each of the main anime that takes place during the 1 Year War. And this week, we're headed to the Thunderbolt sector to have a look at the struggles of the Moore Brotherhood in Gundam Thunderbolt. Now, I do need to preface this by saying that this is not a review of the manga. I would like to review the manga, but there's no way for me to buy the volumes digitally. Not to mention, I just don't have the scratch to buy that many books right now. So, we may revisit this at some point. But today, we're just going to talk anime. Also, some of you might be wondering why we're talking about a non-canon story. Well, main reason is that I just felt like revisiting it, because I hadn't watched it since it came out, so I figured, might as well rewatch it, and not to mention it's a series that I haven't talked too much about in public before. So, I think this could be really interesting, because given the gap of time between the last time I saw it and now, my thoughts might be completely different. So let's go ahead and dive in. Gundam Thunderbolt takes place in the Thunderbolt sector, to no one's surprise. Specifically, it starts off in Side 4 Moore, as the Federation unit known as the Moore Brotherhood, which is founded by former Side 4 inhabitants, are looking to retake their territory from Zeon's Living Dead division. What follows is a battle over this territory as the Moore Brotherhood's highest-ranking pilot, who moonlights as a jazz drummer, Fleming, is given a modified Gundam to use to aid in their mission. Thunderbolt is a two-sided story, though. The story also follows the Living Dead division of Zeon, which I mentioned earlier, who holds the territory largely through pinpoint sniping, and they have the distinction of being made up of soldiers who have lost limbs. The Zeon plot specifically follows Daryl Lorenz, a pilot who lost both of his legs before the show started. The first season follows the conflict between the sides. The second season, which is called Bandit Flower, follows the same two main pilots, but they move in parallels to one another as Zeon and the Moore Brotherhood are investigating a new type cult. With that being the basic setup, here's a little bit more lore that I'll explain. If you're wondering why this particular part of the colonial space matters to the story, the basic background is that Side 4 was one of the first colony spaces hit by Zeon. So the background of many of the pilots and crew members at the start of Thunderbolt is that they've essentially been displaced from their homes since the war began. Though the Federation by no means prioritizes their quest to get their home back, they're at least willing to use them as a test bed for an experimental mobile suit, plus they've got plenty of grunts that they can just sacrifice to get the territory back by sending the cast-offs, because if nothing else, they'll be able to regain a little bit of ground and they're not really losing a whole lot. Now, I'll talk more about the Federation government and the strategy in the deep dive for the original Mobile Suit Gundam, but the short way that I always compare the Zeon and the Federation is that while Zeon is genocidal and driven by zealotry, the Federation is more just uncaring and corrupt. Anyway, let's just keep going with the technical stuff. Thunderbolt is separated into two parts that are now collected as compilation films. The first is called December Sky, and the second is called Bandit Flower. They follow up to around, I want to say, chapter 60-something of the manga, but I could be wrong there. The series is directed by Ko Matsuo, who prior to this was the director of Red Garden and Valvrave the Liberator. Now, both of those series are pretty dark, so it goes without saying that Matsuo was a good choice to direct here. This is a very bleak Gundam show, so you really need a director who can handle the tone of the source material without watering it down. Thunderbolt is very bleak, especially during December Sky, so be prepared for that going in. Bandit Flower, on the other hand, is admittedly a bit more action-heavy and not nearly as dark. Not that it's a bad thing, it's actually a nice change of pace. As for the music, the main man of that is Nariyoshi Kikuchi. He's a well-known saxophone player that you have heard before, if you're an anime fan. There's no way you haven't. Want to know how I know? Yep, that's him. He's also done music for Trigun and Ghost in the Shell as well. Alright, let's go ahead and move ahead with the plot stuff, because there's not really a whole lot to say there. The mecha design is pretty dope. I mean, you've got Kotoki working on it, so what else can you say, right? But anyway, it goes without saying they got a great staff. If there's a phrase that I could use for Gundam Thunderbolt, it's style over substance. Thunderbolt has style in spades. Each of the mobile suits presented along with their weaponry are some of the coolest renditions of the one-year war mobile suits that we've ever seen. There's a reason that the Thunderbolt version of the Full Armor Gundam sells out its Master Grade Verka so often. People who dig this show really dig it because it's ridiculously well animated and it's really fucking fun to watch. Also, I think that I need to address the fact that the Full Armor Gundam has the least fortunate acronym for its name ever. This is a show that's more than happy to indulge itself in the darker aspects of the one-year war as well. So I mentioned in the MS Igloo review, which if you haven't watched yet, you should go back and watch, that at this point of the war, both sides were essentially sending out their recruits. And you see that on the Federation side here. They don't say it outright, but it's likely that they sent so many kids to the Thunderbolt sector because it was low priority. So we've got all these recruits. They're here. We have numbers. We can throw them at this. And to be honest, they're very new to this, so it's not like we're investing a whole lot. Might as well just see what they can do. You see, around this time in the timeline, the Battle of Solomon would have been going on, and that's where their focus is primarily going to be. The battles between the Living Dead Division and the Moore Brotherhood are brutal as well, and this series spares none of the gory details. Another thing worth mentioning is that the series is kind of light when it comes to character backgrounds. There's a lot of things that you have to kind of pick up on because what you're going to get is mostly just stylish flashbacks and things like that. So I'll just kind of give the basic details of the background. Daryl Lorenz is a experienced Zeon soldier who, in a charge during a land-based mission, got his legs blown off, and he's dealing with that trauma. Fleming is the son of the guy who used to run the Side 4 Moore colony, who blew his brains out after Zeon started attacking the colony. The Moore Brotherhood's engineer Cornelius and their acting captain Claudia are good friends of his, with him and Claudia being in sort of a relationship with one another. After everything that happened with his father, Fleming is a bit of a dick to cover up how just fucking angry he is about his life falling apart. And Claudia is a drug addict because she can't deal with the pressure of ordering people to their deaths all the time. It's pretty grimdark, to say the least. At the same time, because of the way the jazzy score works and how high-octane the fight scenes are, the grim elements don't really get enough time to really settle in until you've already watched December Sky from beginning to end. By the time you fire up Bandit Flower, they've been watered down a little bit for a lighter, more standard Gundam tone when it comes to the franchise as a whole. Oddly enough, what it kind of reminded me of, at least the second season on a rewatch, was the Amazon series Reacher, in the sense that it's got some really bloody elements to it, but the tone and pace is more akin to just an action series that's focused on crazy fun set pieces and really good fights. And boy, oh boy, does it have them. Every single fight between Daryl and EO is a blast to watch in December Sky, and their respective adventures in Bandit Flower are just fucking cool. So you remember the Ack guy from the last few series that I've talked about, this little adorable little guy? Well, Bandit Flower will sell you on just how fucking awesome this little guy can be in a mobile suit combat for ground warfare. There's an entire fight/chase scene where a team of them has to extract an informant, and it's just great edge-of-your-seat action. The downside to it all is it actually kind of feels like there's some missed potential here, specifically when it comes to the character of Daryl. I really wish we had the time to dive into discussions of transhumanism and things like that, but that's more of a personal gripe of mine. I think of it like RoboCop. RoboCop has a lot of interesting meta-narratives and ideas that could have been expanded on, but it's an 80s action film at its core. It's just got a little bit more thought behind it. Daryl's plotline in Thunderbolt really isn't that different. It's meant to stay high octane. It's meant to stay with the character and him going to war, but it's got enough intrigue and grimness to it to season the proverbial steak, I guess. Overall, Thunderbolt's a series I recommend. The downside is that the anime is basically an advertisement for the manga, which at this point has jumped off to where they're starting to enter Zeta Gundam territory in regards to the timeline. I honestly would have loved to have read it myself, but for some reason they've removed the digital versions that you could buy on Kindle, putting me at a bit of a loss. Probably has something to do with the book being published with a different magazine in Japan instead of New Type. Maybe someday I'll pick up the volumes that come after the anime, because admittedly the story is fucking intriguing. I mean, fuck, it left off where we're possibly going to be seeing a New Type cult, which is territory that Gundam just hasn't gone into before. Thing is, we have now reached that point in time where we get into the spoilers. So, after my obvious recommendation, to get your attention this week, we have... Sorry, my redhead addiction is flaring up again. But yes, we have Bianca Carlisle here this week, and she's going to share the blank spot on her backstory with us, and Shirt Dude's going to put the word spoiler time right there on her well-shaped posterior. So, enjoy the view, guys. I know I am. Anyway, let's get to the spoiler stuff. So, some people might get on me for calling this show a sort of style over substance type of scenario, but I'm sticking by it. You see, the length of the Thunderbolt series, given that each season could be just a movie and ended up that way, works in its favor in one area and against itself in another. The way that it works in its favor is that it's able to be a really good couple of good action films with a Gundam sticker on them. And by the way, I'm not saying it's like Michael Bay doing Gundam or something like that. That's not a negative. I'd compare it more to a David Twohy film. Okay, that name probably doesn't sound familiar. He's a writer who did G.I. Jane and some other well-known films, but he was also the director of the Riddick trilogy. Well, quadrilogy if you consider the anime film, but anyway. The reason I make the comparison is that the Riddick films, as much as I enjoy them, which they are a lot of fun, they're not exactly what I would call deep. They're pretty straightforward action stories that star a bit of an edgy boy protagonist who goes around and kicks the crap out of people. And boy, howdy, is E.O. Fleming an edgy boy protagonist to his very core. Now, I will say that I don't think Thunderbolt is necessarily shallow, it's just not super deep either. It has just enough to add some flavor to the proverbial dish. Okay, I'm struggling with descriptions today, so I'm going to go stereotypical fat guy and do food comparisons. Thunderbolt is like comfort food. It's a really good pizza or a really good cheeseburger that just hits the spot after a rough day because it's just tasty and enjoyable. You dive in for a short time, you enjoy it, and you have some fun with what's there, and then you leave with a smile on your face. It's not complex, it's not crazy, you're not considering any elements of your own existence afterward, but you still had fun. That's really the long and short of it. Thing is, I 100% think that this show could also be described as close as Gundam has ever been to delving into just flat-out edgy. In fact, I think if there is any one Gundam show or OVA that I would give the moniker of being the edgy Gundam show to, it would definitely be this one. If there's any major criticism I have of this show, to be honest, it is exactly that. Gundam, since its inception, has always bordered on or went straight into seinen territory outside of a couple of series. It's always dealt with mature topics. The thing is, Thunderbolt doesn't really delve into mature topics. Instead, it just has drug use and gore and things of that nature to have them. And they don't really add more than that little bit of seasoning that I mentioned that helps set the tone a little bit. But again, it's not used in a way to bring any sort of existential question or philosophical question like a lot of other Gundam series are. It's just to emphasize how brutal the area is. That's the long and short of it. This is honestly the first series I could think of, thinking back on all the Gundam shows I've watched, that really aims to be as grimdark as it can be without adding the complex layers of characterization that you get in something like Victory Gundam or Iron-Blooded Orphans. As such, your experience isn't really going to be that deep. Would I have liked to have more time with the characters to get to know them better? Absolutely. I'd love to have a little bit more detail on E.O. Fleming and Claudia's relationship, and when she started delving into drug usage. I'd like to have seen more background between Carla and Daryl as well, and we don't really get that, which is a bummer. Now, would it surprise me if we get more of that in the manga? No, but this is a review of the anime. The other thing that I do dig about Thunderbolt, though, is that this is an alternate universe to the main Universal Century, but the technology doesn't really seem that ridiculous, except for maybe the Atlas Gundam, but I don't know. Thinking about how Gundam tech was in 0083, I could see something like the Atlas being made around 0080. Maybe. But as for the full armor Gundam, that one doesn't feel implausible at all. It really does look like a test bed mobile suit. And in fact, its kit really isn't that different in its armament compared to the original full armor Gundam from the Mobile Suit Variation series. It's just got extra shields strapped to it, plus thrusters and a different paint job. Not to mention, I really like the idea of seeing a Gundam's rampage from the perspective of Zeon soldiers. Even though it's not Amuro using it, these suits were so high performance that they really seem like demons to their enemies. The first person sequence where you see EO decimate a Zeon soldier from the Zeon soldier's perspective is just awesome. As for Bandit Flower, I'd say that of the two, like I've mentioned, it's lighter and thus a lot more accessible. And honestly seemed to exist to lighten EO Fleming up a little bit and make him feel less like a quasi-villain protagonist. Granted, you can honestly chalk a lot of it up to Bianca Carlyle. If you look at Bandit Flower as sort of trying for the same Gundam Top Gun vibe and feel that 0083 has, she's basically the geese to E.O. Fleming's Maverick. She's meant to be his wingman, and she balances him out a lot, because she's also a really decorated veteran of the 1 Year War. Hell, she's a notable ball pilot. And if you survive the 1 Year War piloting one of those glorified coffins, it means you're very good at what you do. But she's got a much more sunny demeanor. So the two forge basically a sort of yin and yang relationship. Then you've got Daryl, and in Bandit Flower, he's just kind of there dealing with what happened after the last season. Then again, the plot sort of just kind of set him up as the quote-unquote good guy in the first season, so you know he's not evil, so they just have him there to have a really cool chase sequence while he's piloting an act guy. That's about it. You know, all in all, I think that that's really all there is to say about Thunderbolt. There's not really a whole lot else to really go over, because it's just a solid series that you're going to have a lot of fun with. I really feel like I should at some point pick up the manga just to review it, talk about it, dive into it a little bit more. But admittedly, it's also not super high on my priority list. I mean, keep in mind, I still need to buy the deluxe editions of Berserk at some point, so that's going to be a big investment. But either way, it gets a recommendation from me. If you haven't checked out Thunderbolt, check out the anime. You will probably enjoy it if you're a Gundam fan. Just don't go in expecting something super deep. Just watch this when you need a good popcorn flick or two, because they definitely fit that bill, and they fit it very, very well. So on that note, guys, once again, I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, especially share and subscribe. Once we get to 20,000 subscribers, I'm actually going to do a review of 30-something Office Lady Haman-sama, which I have never reviewed or even read through a slice of life manga before, so it'll be an interesting step out of my comfort zone, to say the least. On top of that, of course, if you want to support the channel through Patreon or Subscribestar, those options are down in the description. Of course, if you do that, you'll get added to the credit sequence we are going to be seeing in just a second anyway. Plus, if you go for the higher tiers on that, then you're going to be able to tell me what I can review in the future. And then finally, of course, we have both my new novella, American Monsters, the Genesis of Project Lazarus, and 3 Nights, 4 Days, Part 2, the comic book, over on Indiegogo as well. Check both of those out. The links will be in the description. Until next time, my name is Micah Curtis, your favorite vanilla gorilla. Thanks so much for watching, and have yourselves a great rest of your day.